You're listening to Beast Over Burden, powered by Barbell Logic.
We're Niki and Andrew, your personal professional coaches.
We help you take control of your fitness through hard but doable training and nutrition practices that fit your busy life.
Build a stronger, healthier version of yourself with lifelong habits. Hello, welcome back to Beast Over Burden, powered by Barbell Logic. Welcome to another series. We're just kicking things off today with a fresh one. I'm your host, Niki Sims. With me, the notorious Andrew Jackson.
Notorious. Okay.
Notorious.
Let's do this freshie.
Yes, fresh series, freshly picked. We just came off of talking about nutrition, physical freedom, training, physical freedom. Now we're going to get into the things that actually drive it. We're going to talk about the lifts, all of them. Talk about what you do in the gym. We're going to focus on the main barbell lifts, and then we actually are going to get into some accessories. And believe it or not, we're going to talk about machines because there is a place for them, even though you are the machine. For each lift, we're going to talk about how to do it, especially, the main things to think about. We'll talk about some cues that work, the proper setup. We're going to talk about common errors that we see, how to correct them, the keys to success. We'll also cover what programming looks like in the long term. Programming your first week is going to look a lot different than it looks in year 3. And it's been interesting to see what that looks like for so many different people. We're just going to get really almost annoyingly detailed. I think you like that. Let's get nerdy.
Yeah, that should be fun.
So, of course, we're going to talk about the main barbell lifts: squat, deadlift, press, and bench press. And let's start with the big baddie, the squat.
My favorite.
Your favorite?
I think so.
You're a good squatter.
It's probably the lift that's my least impressive. I struggle with the most.
Interesting.
Frustrates me the most. But if I had to pick one lift, that'd be the one lift to rule them all. It's the one that got me into lifting. It's the one that caught my attention with just how systemically difficult it was.
Yeah.
Got like one gray hair in my mustache. I mean, I have many gray hairs, but there's one that is just like, I can't stop trying to make it go away. Like, so
You have a Sharpie, you could just color it.
actually I do in my hand. So, this is bad.
He's doing it.
Okay.
Systemic. I love that. It's so true.
Yeah, this is like, the silly question, if you could only do one lift. Of course, it's a ridiculous question, but if I had to limit myself for time, let's say if time constraint became a thing, that'd be the one that I think I'd pick.
Yeah.
But it's also the most frustrating.
It feels like, for my very small amount of time I dabbled in golf, it feels like you just are constantly trying to find the perfect rep.
Yeah, you go chasing after it. And every once in a while, I've hit a groove where it seems natural. Like the movement feels like I figured it out. And I'm like, I finally figured out the squat.
What does it feel like when you're in that groove?
That I'm not second guessing things on the way down. I feel balanced, predictably balanced in the bottom. Like I'm not questioning the bottom position or hesitant into the bottom position. It's just every rep feels consistent and that I can count on getting a bounce and accelerating out of the hole. That's probably the thing that I noticed the most.
You've used the phrase recently that it feels like you're squatting with your legs. Like you feel like you're doing the lift with your legs and not having to carry a lot, like in your spine or something like that.
Yeah, for a long time, I was more using my hip extensors. It was a little bit more hip dominant movement. And so I would very quickly out of the bottom get into a position where my back was fairly horizontal and my legs were extended. So it was it feels like my back, but really it's obviously the hip extensors. The back is just
the good old squat morning.
Squat morning. The back is just pretty long moment arm at that point. So I think you feel it in your low back a lot. And I've been focusing more on feeling my legs in the movement, especially through the sticking point, kind of that 4 to 6 inches out of the bottom. And even if that means I can't lift quite as much weight, I'd rather be training my legs through that movement than kind of shooting my butt back and muscling it up with, with my hips.
Yeah, what that looks like, and I imagine some of you have done it, is if you watch the video of it, you are clearly working. You are extending your legs, but often your hip angle closes and the bar is not moving. So effort is occurring, but bar movement is not.
Yep.
Hips move up and the bar doesn't. And then eventually, I mean, if you don't miss the rep, your hips are going to start opening and you'll finish the rep. But yeah, you end up, instead of your hip angle opening on the way up, it closes before it opens. I've done a few hundred of those myself. It's good times.
So let's break it down from what details do you think are important before you even take the bar out of the rack?
Stance, where their feet are going to go, because that has a lot to do with how they're going to be able to move and get to depth. So I typically look at shoulder width. If you look at someone from behind, they're wearing a t-shirt, can take like the seam of their t-shirt at the sleeve, draw an imaginary straight line down, and that's usually where the center of their heel goes. It's kind of where I'll start. And then toes end up being about 30 degrees, which is like, what does that end up being? Like 1 p.m. and 11 or 1 and 11. Yeah, but stance is a very important one.
Do you find that narrow-shouldered people need to sometimes go wider than shoulder width?
Yes, in addition to needing to do chin-ups and bench press, their stance will go a little bit wider.
Well, I think I would say if the shoulders are clearly wider than the hips, then I would go with the shoulder. If the hips are wider than the shoulders, which sometimes happen, particularly with more female or less male lifters.
Ladies.
You might need to go with a little bit wider than shoulder width. And interestingly, I think that's one of those details that can vary from person to person.
Yes.
Based on preference and different femur lengths and, segment lengths.
Different pelvis structure.
Yeah. So that I would say is a great starting point. That's where I pretty much aim for everybody to go with heels at about shoulder width apart. As you progress and advance, that's one of the details that I think is worth experimenting with to see if there's slight variations. Plus, unless you're like some of my more neurotic lifters who tape their floor, I think you've had these before as well.
Yeah, indeed.
You're probably not setting up in exactly the same stance every time, although there's something to be said to setting some visual cues to make the lifts more repeatable.
You know what the funny thing is that I for sure did in my squat forever is you look down at your feet and you're like, yeah, clear. Both my feet are pointed out to the same degree. Yes, obviously. And then like I'll watch a video and like my right foot is clearly more turned in. But like when you're looking at your feet, you're just like, yes, this is perfect.
Yeah.
and then you realize, well, that's been different for a really long time. Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely an aspect of lifting that I think is good to where you benefit from filming yourself.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, just set the camera up directly from behind so that you can, or the front, so you can see what your stance actually is.
Which, man, those two angles are really tough to watch. Sorry. Yeah. When you film yourself from the back and then film yourself from the front, you're just like, oh no, this is not what I wanted to see myself. This is not how. Just like Jabba the Hutting your way down into the bottom of the squat from the front.
It's for science. It's for science.
Anywho, yep. It's for science. So that is really helpful. But yeah, the stance really does make a difference with what's going on upstream, like you said, and that also has a lot to do with segment lengths and other anatomy. So stance.
Yep.
What else when you talk about setup?
Grip the bar.
And we're talking about bar position in the low or high bar.
I tend to teach most new lifters to low bar. I don't think that I would not die on the hill over high bar versus low bar. And I have a lot of clients that prefer high bar for one reason or another. But I do think that low bar tends to be more forgiving with ankle and knee and hip mobility limitations. It's more challenging on the shoulder, which tends to be why I will have clients sometimes high bar for a while. If they're telling me you just can't find a good, stable low bar position and they don't feel confident or it's just really killing their shoulders, I'll try to get them into low bar. We'll play around with grip a little bit. I tend to try to get people to take as narrow a grip as possible. Counterintuitively, puts less external rotation on the shoulder. So, sometimes people will think that a wider grip, because it does in some ways feel a little easier at times to get under the bar, but then you're stuck with this really significantly externally rotated shoulder. So
call it the pterodactyl.
The pterodactyl.
The pterodactyl,
oh man,
super wide grip, like fingertips on the barbell and just like hunched over.
Yeah, so I typically tell people to grab the bar just outside their shoulders to start with, just, to give something to aim at. Some people need to go a little bit narrower, some a little wider.
Yeah, it has a lot to do with your forearm length.
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And flexibility.
Yeah, and then get the bar into, like I said, generally I start with the low bar position, bar just under the spine of the scapula, the knobby part on your scapula, on your upper back, resting on the meat shelf, as we've talked about.
The meat shelf, yes.
The brisket shelf.
TM.
I should probably know what kind of meat that is, but whatever the posterior delt is.
Yeah.
You want to see a kind of a bunch of meat there trapped under the bar. And I've become a lot more flexible with what type of grip. I really don't care too much whether it's thumb wrapped around the bar or thumb over the bar. I personally, over the last few years, have been wrapping my thumb around the bar because I can get into a narrower grip.
Yeah.
And that feels more secure on my back. So the key there is not whether it's thumb over or thumb under, it's that you are carrying the bar on your back and that the bar is secure. So find a grip width position that supports creating that secure meat shelf and the bar in a position that it's not rolling or moving or changing during the lift.
Yeah.
And you're not having to hold it in place with your hands.
Oof, yeah, no bueno.
That's the benefit of going thumbs over, is that you put yourself in a less likely position to try to be holding onto the bar or supporting the bar with your hand, although I have seen people do it.
Yep, it happens.
It's not foolproof.
Yeah.
But maybe we should go back on the stance as well. The key on the stance is that it enables you to get into a full depth squat where your hip joint is below your knee joint and that your knees are able to track over your toes through the lift. There can be a little bit of movement in and out, but you don't want to be so wide that your legs are caving in significantly in the bottom.
Yeah, you kind of imagine your kneecap and your second toe pointing in the same direction.
Right. And then key point on the grip is getting into a position where you can support the bar securely on your back
while you're bending over,
rolling around. While you're moving.
Yeah, a good unrack feels like the bar is just all of a sudden part of you, not one where you're really just trying to balance this weight and deal with it while you're moving. Just really stays in the same place. If it moves down while you lift, you either got loose or it started too low. If it moves up while you're lifting, it probably started too high.
I think that's an excellent segue into mindset or key areas to focus during the lift. That if you are thinking about the squat as a different movement because of the bar on your back, you're probably going to run into problems.
A different movement than?
If you don't feel one with the bar and you're not managing the movement as one combined set of mass. We'll talk probably more about the combined center of mass. But when you're squatting without a bar, the dynamics are different, but only because of where the center of mass is. But the way that you should feel in terms of the balance in your body and how you're coordinating the movement should be the same even as you add weight. The barbell is a tool to load normal human movement. The barbell changes the mechanics of how it looks because the center of mass moves, but the principles behind the movement are the same. that we want to have balanced, normal human movement as your knees and your hips bend down to the bottom of the squat and standing back up.
When you say balance, what are you referring to?
So, from a physics perspective, an object is in balance when its center of mass is over its center of balance. The center of mass for a human standing without anything, without any load tends to be a couple of centimeters in front of their sacrum, and the center of balance is roughly the middle of your foot. So, as we all know intuitively, if you lean forward, that's going to shift the center of mass in front of or forward of the center of balance. You can imagine a line in balance. You could draw a straight line from the middle of your foot to that center of mass. You will not be tipping over. And at some point, if you push the center of mass too far, then you fall over. Between the point of falling over and being in perfect balance, you're kind of in this not falling over because you're actively resisting the force of the center of mass. You're resisting the moment arm that's created from your center of mass pushing forward of the center of balance. So then what happens when you put a barbell on is now, imagine it's just a 45-pound bar, the empty bar. The center of mass moves up slightly towards the barbell, but it's still dominated by your body. And the problem that you're trying to solve with your body during this movement fundamentally is keeping the combined center of mass of your body and the barbell directly over the center of balance in your foot. And the only thing that changes as you put more weight on the bar is that the combined center of mass is going to move closer and closer to the bar. If the bar weighed infinity, the center of mass would be right in the middle of the bar. But most people are lifting somewhere between, 1 to 2.5, maybe 3 times as much body weight. So your body is still a pretty big component of that combined center of mass.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of the problems that we solve as coaches and as lifters on the squat come back to moving your knees and hips through as much range of motion as possible, your joints, while solving the problem of maintaining the combined center of mass over your center of balance. That's a geeky way of saying what I think a squat is.
Yeah.
But the reason I think that's important is that if you maintain that mental model, then diagnosing problems becomes easier.
So there are a lot of tools out there. There are even apps that track your bar path. How can that be misleading?
So the cue we've used for a long time, the master cue, is essentially an external cue to the lifter to solve the problem of exactly what I just described, staying in balance during the range of motion. The master cue, for those that haven't heard, is to imagine the bar being in a slot, like a Smith machine over the middle of your foot. And you should maintain the bar in that slot over the middle of your foot. That is an excellent external cue. An external cue is when you give somebody a problem to solve with their body and then let them figure it out.
Okay.
So there's external cues, there's internal cues, which are usually like shove your knees out. It's a body cue. Could also be a bar cue where you're like throw the bar back for the bench or something like that. Squeeze the bar. It's like a literal do this thing. An external cue is where it's something happening outside of your body and you're trying to solve this movement problem with your brain.
That's interesting.
Based on the feedback mechanism that you have. And so that is exactly what the master cue is. It's imagine you've got that slot in a Smith machine and you're trying to keep the bar directly over the midfoot. That is not a literal cue, or it's not a thing that you should be literally doing unless, again, the bar weighs infinity or relatively infinity. Like if somebody's squatting 1,000 pounds, you're probably going to have basically a bar in a Smith machine kind of bar path.
Yeah.
But there are many cases where the bar will not move in a perfectly straight line. And depending on the body of the lifter, there are many cases where the bar will be nowhere near the middle of the foot. In fact, if I'm just warming up with an empty bar and my body at 250 pounds is dominating the combined center of mass, I bend over where a whole bunch of my mass is in my hips and the bar is going to be way forward of midfoot. Any case where most of the mass on the body is more than the bar and further away from the bar, then you're not going to have a perfectly vertical bar path.
And if you try to move it in a perfectly vertical bar path, we'll see some sketchy things happen.
You'll be out of balance.
Right.
So master cue, people and myself included, one of the biggest mistakes that I made was taking cues and trying to literally execute them. So I would take the master cue, and this, I think, coincided with smartphones with video camera capabilities, where we started actually being able to, in real time, watch ourselves squat.
Yeah.
Where things like the master cue got screwed up. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the master cue. It's a wonderful cue. But if you take it literally, you're going to have an incorrect mental model, and you could potentially either coach yourself or others to move incorrectly. So I would do exactly that. I would watch myself from the side and all the way from my warm-up set, and I would put myself out of balance.
Yep.
In order to make it look like the bar was perfectly over midfoot.
And or go into overextension and back.
Yes.
To try and make it happen.
Right. I would be way on my heels. So I would be ignoring symptoms that the master cue is precisely intended to solve. Because if you can't see the bar and you just try to imagine what it would be like to keep the bar over the middle of the foot, you would essentially be trying to, what that master cue really is doing is getting you to pay attention to where the combined center of mass is and feel that going directly down the middle of your foot. Because most people that were using the master cue, or most people lifting at that time, are probably lifting at least a couple 100 pounds. So it's getting close to at least body weight. Maybe they're up into 300 pounds. So it feels like the combined center of mass is pretty close to the barbell, close enough. But if you get to the point where you're thinking of it so literally that you over cue, you essentially, like cues often result in people being over cued, right? Especially when they try to do it literally. And I think that the bar path is a perfect example of it. It's easy to over index on paying attention to the bar path because you can see it. The problem with geeking out about the combined center of mass is you can't see it. You can maybe infer where it is, you can estimate where it is, but unless you're running some really powerful computer simulations, you're not going to be able to know where it is. But the lifter can always feel it.
Yeah.
They can always feel whether they're in balance or not. And you can see whether you're in balance or not.
Like you get instant feedback that is correctable oftentimes if you're not balanced.
Right. And here's the reason practically why being balanced is so important, because you can produce more force. The reason you can lift more with machines is because you're not having to balance. It's a feature that you have to work on staying balanced in big compound barbell lifts, because you're getting to train the skill of staying balanced with heavier and heavier loads. And it's also the reason why the skill of the movement enables you to sometimes lift significantly more, even though you haven't put on any more muscle, or, some days you're just, why the hell can't I squat what yesterday was an easy weight? And it might not be just because you're fatigued. It could be you're not staying imbalanced. Your movement, and this is why I think technique does matter, because you need to have enough skill to maintain balance consistently through the range of motion so that you can train it and you can produce more force, add more weight, blah, 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 blah. So it really becomes a practice in the skill of maintaining balance while moving your hip and knee joints together through as much range of motion as possible.
Which, key to success is understanding what that feels like and how to move through it. And if we want to talk about common errors, a lot of them can be corrected by making sure you're back in balance. And one of them that has a lot to do with that I see often is, there are many I could talk about, but like the timing at which your back angle is set and your knee position is set, and then what happens to those angles as you come up out of the bottom.
Yeah, and those are tricky because sometimes you can feel in balance if you aren't moving your knees and your hips together. But because they're not working together, you're not going to be able to or lift as much weight eventually. So balance can't be the only thing that you pay attention to, but it's a big one.
It's a big one. Yeah.
And there's also errors that can pop up where you feel balanced because you have overcompensated for the hips and knees not working together at the same time. The one you just mentioned, which is my favorite to work on lately. I think it's probably the thing I work on the most with my lifters, which is overextending the lumbar, the low back, as they start the descent, because they push the butt back without pushing the knees forward. That's actually really, really common. Or they push the knees forward without pushing the butt back.
Yeah.
And it leaves them with this, depending on how extreme it is, this booty pop, I call it, where I'll I'll zoom in and go frame by frame and just go like frame forward, frame back, frame back. It's like, so I make them twerk.
It happens so often. Oh my gosh. Yes.
If you can set your camera up from the side and go to the point when you initiate the descent, and if you can find a point where you go frame forward, frame back, and all you see is the hips do this little
send it to Andrew.
The bar doesn't move, but all that happens is the low back moves. Maybe the knees move a little bit. So you'll feel balanced. That's the body trying to stay in balance. But because you're not moving your hips and knees together, you have to solve the problem by disconnecting the torso, which that I think is another core component of the squat, is maintaining your back in a rigid, neutral position.
Yeah. I see more overextension lately than I see flexion.
Yep.
And ideally, you're able to contract all the muscles around your spine and break into the squat by bending your knees and hips at the same time in a way that makes it seem like your spine is not a series of many joints. It is, though. I don't want to see the joints when you do your squat. I don't want to see that you have movement in your thoracic. And just like Andrew was just saying, I don't want to see your wonderful twerk. I want it to be like you have a piece of rebar instead of a spine, and the rest of it is a cylinder of concrete. That is our goal.
My analogy is like a foosball player. You know how they have the
that's a great one.
The rod go through the hip.
Yeah.
You want to rotate at the hip like a foosball player. Your back should just be hinging at the hip.
Yeah. And often when I'll see a squat start in with some extension, guess what happens for another part of the lift?
It has to come out.
Flexion. Yeah, because you can't hold on to that kind of extension by the time you bend down that much.
So usually somebody that starts out with that twerk at the top is also going to see the extension come out.
Yeah.
They're not actually getting into flexion. In most cases, I think they're getting into a neutral position at the very bottom. But it'll look like, quote unquote, butt wink.
Yeah.
Often because they're set into overextension at the top. Like you said, they can't maintain it, or they can't get to full depth while being in overextension. So right as they get to the bottom, you'll see this drift forward in the bar and the whole setup. Usually the knees slide forward and there's a little bit of loss of overextension. And another great way that you can see this is if on the way down, you see a whole bunch of ripples in the shirt that are then gone on the way back up.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times some people will regain that overextension on the way up, which are usually people I find that have a lot of chronic low back symptoms, is because I think they're putting their low back through a lot of cycles of going
with hundreds of pounds.
With hundreds of pounds, they're going from extension to flexion to back to extension, right in the bottom of the squat, and the moment arm is the longest on the back. And you can train around, like some people can adapt to that, but it just seems like things work a lot better when you maintain more of a neutral position. There are studies show, and your back moves a ton, even when it looks like it's not moving. So this is another one of those, okay, people, don't take this cue literally, but it's definitely inefficient at a minimum to have your back going from overextension, back to neutral, back to overextension, right in the bottom of the squat.
Yeah, no bueno.
Because again, go back to first principle. you're probably not going to be staying in balance, or it's going to feel really inconsistent. I find that also people that say it feels like the bottom is in a different position every single rep, they usually have that as a variable in the movement.
Yes.
And they're not getting tension consistently because so much is changing in their hip and where they're actually able to get a stretch.
And it just feels different.
How much extension they have or how much they let go. It just adds a lot of variation in the bottom.
Yeah, because another cool thing to think about is some pretty important muscles originate in your pelvis, like on your sits bones, which is the point really far on your backside, farthest away from your head. So when I'm thinking about the foosball leaning over, it's like you want your sits bones and your head to kind of be on the same page. And that means that those muscle origins are lengthening from their insertion along the legs. And that leads to you feeling a really nice bounce and tension at the bottom.
Yep.
But if you're rounding in your lower back or overextending, then you're kind of not getting into the system of tightness, of tension that you want to hit at the bottom, because maybe you missed the opportunity to create that.
Predominantly the adductors.
Yeah, you need those big bounce muscles for sure. Yeah, those are the main ones for me that no matter what error I see or correction I give, it comes down to, are you in balance? Are you getting into a rigid, neutral spine that maintains as you move? And is your timing consistent to create hip and knee
coordination?
Yeah. Yep. Those are the biggest ones.
Yep. I'd say that like those three are...
Everything kind of stems off of that.
99% of that. Yeah. I mean, there's a million different cues we could go into or ways of solving it, but those are the keys. If you can maintain those three, you're going to train well.
Yeah.
Efficiently.
So what have you seen squat programming look like between when someone first begins through their more advanced period of training? How does it evolve?
I think early on, squatting more frequently helps a lot because it is such a complex movement. I think the frequency helps develop the skill. And
sometimes it's an important stretch. Sometimes people need it to stretch. Like 3 times a week, getting into that position is kind of essential. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a mobility exercise for sure. Just a good systemic stress. So I find squatting frequently at the beginning helps a lot. Towards the, as somebody advances, I usually have 2 different slots of squatting. I think that's usually the least I go down to is squatting twice a week. I think pulling heavy, you can go down to once a week and still progress just fine.
Spoiler alert for the deadlift episode.
But squatting, I find less than 2 a week.
Yeah.
Although technically I'm squatting right now once a week. I just have 2 slots stacked on top of each other. So it could work, but I'm doing other movements that get me usually into a squat pattern, like cleans or snatches. So the first slot of the week, it could go either way. Doesn't really matter. But one slot is usually more about accumulating volume. And the other one is practicing the skill, at least one set of heavier weights, something like 1 to 5 reps as a top set with then back off volume. And I really kind of think of that top set as more of like an over warm up or a skill set.
Oh yeah, totally.
And I mean, yes, it contributes to hypertrophy, but I think that keeping one set in there at a heavier weight is helpful for practicing the skill and then also for making the lighter sets feel better. If you're only working around your training weight, I think you end up, I don't know. I just find that it works better to have at least one set a week where you're practicing something that's pushing the intensity.
That's cool.
And then doing a lot of work, a lot of accumulating hard sets. Like we talked about, it's probably the vast majority of the work is going to be between 4 and 8 reps. And I do sets based on what time allows. It's usually no more than 5 sets of squat in a session, somewhere between 1 to 5 sets and 4 to 8 reps per set.
Yeah. Pretty much everybody is going to encounter a period where they have to take a break from low bar squat. I feel like that's happened with everybody. Like,
Yeah, I mean,
something happens with your shoulder, something happens with your wrist. Okay, we're gonna do high bar squats. Okay, we're gonna do safety bar squats. Like,
yep.
something's gonna happen where we need to like give the low bar position a little bit of a break.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's definitely the thing that changes probably the most, is that I just use different variants. You know, one I've been enjoying lately is the Zercher squat.
Oh yeah, I saw one of your clients doing that in the background of my client's video.
Yeah, because it's kind of like safety bar squat for your shoulders. Like, it doesn't really irritate your shoulders. He was having a shoulder issue, but he also has a transformer bar. We've been doing that, but it's just kind of like something different.
Yeah,
a little bit of variety for the sake of variety, but you still get a little bit of that upper back loading.
I always wonder how people hold the bar with their arms not wanting to die.
You can maintain that position with a shocking amount of weight. Surprisingly, not the limiting factor.
Wow. I really am surprised.
Yeah. It pulls the center of mass forward. So the bottom position is pretty comfortable to get into. I don't know. It's a great variation. I like it.
Just maintaining your back position, that's the limiting factor. That's everything.
Yep.
And you can get to depth. Yeah. That one has always looked to me like, who the hell came up with this, and leave? But I have seen it regularly. Yes.
It's kind of like a cambered front squat.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at those like camber bars, so it lowers the center of mass.
Yep.
Yeah. Playing around with different variations of the squat is definitely something that changes over time.
Yeah.
I would also say that I tend to find ways to get leg extensions into the program for a more advanced lifter, because the squat does not tend to train the rectus femoris quite as well as the leg extension. So I like those as a leg training accessory.
Yeah, I like those too.
That I find benefits the squat.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I know we could probably have 12 more episodes on the squat, but
yeah, we're like 45 minutes in. We're over the line and we barely scratched the surface.
Yeah. Excited to talk about the next lift with you. Thank you so much for listening. I hope everybody who listened today has a really wonderful squat day, and think about
let's go squat.
Midfoot balance. Yes. Thank you, Andrew. Let's go squat. Bye, everybody.